Hello, my friend. Welcome to Dreamy Nights. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight we'll drift together into a quiet story, one that feels like lamplight and the soft ticking of time itself. So settle in, breathe gently, and let the day fall away. When you're ready, our story begins. The evening had folded itself neatly around the small town, leaving only a muted shimmer of light along the rooftops. Inside a narrow street that curved softly like a question mark, an old workshop glowed behind glass fogged slightly by the warmth within. A sign above the door read, Ansel Finch Clockmaker, though the letters had long since faded into a soft bronze patina. The moment one entered, the air felt alive, not bustling, but pulsing quietly, as if time itself were breathing through the walls. Dozens of clocks lined the shelves, each ticking in its own rhythm, creating a gentle mosaic of sound. A deep tock from a grandfather clock near the back, a quicksilver tick-tick from a travel watch, the subtle swish of pendulums, tracing their small arcs through the air. Ansel moved slowly through the workshop, his steps deliberate, his hands steady. The floorboards creaked under his slippers, each sound a reminder that this place, like him, had weathered years with grace. He wore a worn linen apron, the kind that carried the scent of wood dust and oil no matter how often it was washed. As he passed a long bench scattered with brass screws and tiny springs, he lit a single lamp with a match. The flame flared, then softened, and a sphere of amber light blossomed around him. He took a seat at the work table. Before him rested a small carriage clock, its glass door open, its gears exposed like the inside of a living thing. He leaned closer, adjusting his spectacles, the reflection of the lamplight glinting in his lenses. His fingers moved with patient reverence, brushing a delicate mechanism clean with a feathered tool. Each touch made a faint metallic sigh, a sound that mingled with the steady ticking from all around. He found comfort in these rituals. Every evening began this way, quiet, unspoken, yet full of purpose. Outside, the world could rush and tumble as it wished. In here, seconds stretched gently, like silk being unrolled. Ansel often thought that time, when listened to closely, had a personality, shy, whispering kind. Some nights it felt playful, others meditative, always steady in its heartbeat. He paused to wind a small brass key into the back of the clock. The spring tightened with a soft hum, and when he released it, the gear train stirred to life. The clock began to tick again, faint but confident, its voice rejoining the others in quiet chorus. Ansel smiled, leaning back in his chair. The motion of the pendulums seemed to nod approvingly, as if welcoming the little clock back to their circle. From the ceiling, beams, strings of dust motes drifted lazily in the lamplight. The air smelled faintly of oil and varnished pine. On a distant shelf, an antique wall clock let out a single mellow chime, not announcing the hour, simply breathing its tone into the night. The sound rolled softly through the room, bouncing from glass to wood, until it faded into silence again. Ansel closed his eyes for a moment, listening. Every chime reminded him that each clock here had lived a life beyond his care, on mantelpieces, in parlors, beside photographs of those long gone. He sometimes imagined them carrying memories in their brass hearts, fragments of laughter or long-ago footsteps. He never spoke of this notion aloud. It was simply part of his craft. This quiet belief that time was more than measurement, it was remembrance. He opened his eyes again and began polishing a pendulum with a soft cloth. His movements were rhythmic, unhurried, reflecting the same care he gave to all his work. Outside, a breeze brushed the ivy that framed the workshop window, making the shadows tremble faintly against the walls. The air inside seemed thicker now, as if the night itself had decided to linger here, suspended among the slow, deliberate ticks. Ansel reached for a small wooden box and opened it gently. Inside lay several tiny keys, each labeled in careful handwriting. He ran a finger along their edges, selecting one that gleamed faintly under the lamplight. When he held it between his fingers, it caught the glow and threw a sliver of light onto the table. The little reflection trembled bright and alive, like the brief spark of a memory returning from long ago. He smiled softly. Somewhere in the distance, another clock answered with a gentle tick, as though in recognition. And so the evening went on, time unfolding, not as a line, but as a circle, repeating, renewing. The workshop seemed to sway gently with it, a vessel floating on an invisible tide of seconds. Ansel continued his careful work, each motion part of a quiet symphony no one else could hear. The soundscape of the room, ticking, breathing soft tools against brass, became the language of calm itself. At the edge of the lamplight, the repaired clock now ticked evenly, its heartbeat joined to the rhythm of its companions. Ansel leaned back again, content. The room was alive with sound, but none of it intruded. Everything simply was steady and serene. The night deepened softly around the workshop, the outer world dimming to a wash of muted silver and blue. Inside, the lamplight rested like a small sun upon Ansel's workbench, its glow tapering gently into shadow. The clocks continued their quiet conversation, hundreds of small, distinct voices overlapping into something soothing and whole. Their rhythm was the workshop's heartbeat, a steady pulse that seemed to slow time itself. Ansel stood and stretched slightly his shoulders, creaking in the same familiar way as the floorboards beneath his feet. He moved toward a shelf lined with pocket watches in various states of rest, some open like tiny metal flowers, others closed tight asleep in their shells. Each had its own character, its own way of breathing. He selected one at random, a modest silver piece with a faint engraving of vines curling across its back. Cradling it in his palm, he turned it over thoughtfully. The glass was clouded, the hands stilled. A thin crack ran across the dial, almost invisible unless caught by the lamplight. He could feel its silence, a quiet yearning to move again. He sat and placed it on the velvet mat before him. His tools were arranged in a tidy semicircle, tweezers, screwdrivers, fine brushes, all glinting with quiet discipline. The air smelled faintly of metal and tea, the latter cooling on a nearby saucer he had forgotten. He reached for his loop, settling it against his eye, and began the patient ritual of opening the watch's backplate. Inside the mechanism waited a delicate labyrinth of gears, springs, and levers. Dust had gathered in its corners, dulling the gold tones to a soft brass haze. Ansel exhaled slowly, his breath barely stirring the air, then dipped a brush, into the tiniest bottle of cleaning oil. His hands moved with practiced certainty, each motion slow enough to feel sacred. The brush swept through the gears, freeing them from years of stillness, each pass making the metal gleam just a bit more brightly. He could hear the faintest whisper as one gear nudged another. To anyone else, it might have sounded like coincidence, a trick of movement. But to Ansel, it was something gentler, older. A sigh of awakening. He smiled, whispering under his breath, "You've been waiting a long time, haven't you?" There was no answer, but in the hush that followed, a low chime sounded from a nearby mantel clock, its tone so soft that it barely disturbed the air. It felt almost like a reply. He continued working, easing the balance wheel into place, testing its movement with the smallest flick of his finger. It swayed once, twice, then settled into a faint, rhythmic motion. The sound was fragile, like a heartbeat, just beginning after a long sleep. He watched it for several minutes, mesmerized by its persistence. The motion steadied. The ticking grew sure. Satisfied, Ansel leaned back, taking in the workshop once more. Shadows swayed gently across the walls, shaped by the pendulum's movement and the lamplight's quiet dance. He took another sip of his tea, lukewarm now, but comforting nonetheless. The taste of chamomile lingered sweet and faintly floral, grounding him in the moment. On a far shelf, an old grandfather clock gave a deep, deliberate tick, followed by another. The sound rolled through the room like a wave, wrapping the smaller ticks in warmth. Every time that clock spoke, Ansel felt its age more than a century of keeping rhythm unbroken through decades of hands-homes and generations. He often imagined that every clock in his care held a memory of those who had listened to it. The pocket watch before him might once have lived in the pocket of a traveler, or hung by the bedside of a writer, its ticking marking the quiet hours between thought and dream. The idea brought a faint smile to his lips. He didn't need to know the details. It was enough to sense the presence of time's passage, folded gently within these objects. He placed the restored watch upright and wound it carefully, counting the soft clicks of the key. When the final one echoed faintly, the ticking became sure and steady. He set it beside the carriage clock he had repaired earlier, the two rhythms weaving together like old friends reuniting after a long silence. For a while, Ansel did nothing more. He simply listened to the clocks, to the soft whir of a turning gear somewhere behind him, to the breathing stillness of the workshop. It was a music that required no melody, no instrument beyond patience itself. Outside the window, the moon had risen higher, tracing pale shapes on the floorboards. The ivy swayed in the gentle breeze, its movement casting shadows like slow-moving waves across the walls. The lamplight flickered, but did not fade, and the air held the scent of brass and varnish, tinged faintly with the sweetness of night. Ansel closed the lid of the pocket watch and held it to his ear. The ticking was perfect, not loud, not hurried, just alive. He slipped it into a soft cloth pouch and set it with the others, awaiting their return to their owners. His fingers lingered on it for a moment, as if offering thanks. The room exhaled with him. Every sound seemed to soften in response, every clock easing its voice just slightly, as though recognizing that another had been brought back to life. Ansel smiled again, his expression unreadable. In the dim light, a blend of satisfaction and quiet wonder. He reached to adjust the flame of the lamp, letting it burn lower. The workshop sank deeper into calm shadows, thickening warmth, gathering in still corners. He sat for a while longer, hands folded, eyes half closed. The sound of time continued around him, steady, kind, eternal. The next evening arrived, gently wrapped in the hush of early night. The sky outside Ansel's window was a watercolor of indigo and pearl, the last traces of daylight dissolving beyond the rooftops. Inside the workshop was already awake, not with movement, but with the soft, patient ticking of countless clocks, each keeping its own quiet rhythm. The sound filled the air like a pulse familiar and tender. Ansel entered carrying a small bundle wrapped in linen. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a modest wooden clock, square-faced and time-worn. The edges were softened by years of touch, the grain faintly polished where hands had once turned it toward the light. It had arrived earlier that afternoon with a handwritten note tucked inside my grandmother's clock. It hasn't ticked in many years. Please be gentle. He had read the words twice, touched by the trust in them. Now, as he set the clock on his table, he whispered softly, "We'll bring your voice back, little one." He lowered himself onto a stool, the wood creaking comfortably beneath him. The lamplight spread its amber glow across the workbench, revealing the subtle shimmer of fine dust motes drifting like golden snow. The clock sat in the center, quiet and patient, its silence deeper than most. Ansel reached for a tiny screwdriver, the metal cool against his fingertips. He removed the back panel each turn of the screw, releasing a faint sigh of old wood. Inside lay a mechanism of brass and steel, dulled with time, its gears still and dry. For a moment, he simply looked, not studying, just seeing. Every clock told its story differently. Some spoke of precision, others of love, a few of loneliness. This one felt tender, perhaps a little shy. He began to clean it, dipping a fine brush into a pot of oil and tracing each gear's edge. The scent of machine oil mixed with the faint sweetness of polished wood. Outside, an owl called once from somewhere beyond the ivy wall, the sound echoing softly through the still night. The rhythm of the brush was hypnotic. Each stroke freed a fleck of dust, each motion restored a hint of luster. Time seemed to bend around him, not speeding, not slowing, simply deepening. He could hear beneath the surface of the ticking clocks the faint murmur of memory, a sound not quite imagined, not entirely real. It was as if the walls themselves remembered every clock that had passed through this room. He thought about the woman who had written the note. Perhaps she had grown up listening to this very clock, its steady tick marking her childhood mornings. Maybe it had stood on a mantel beside photographs of loved ones, its chime mingling with laughter and conversation. He didn't need to know. The act of restoring it was in itself an act of listening. After some time, he reached for a thin pair of tweezers and lifted the balance wheel from its seat. It wobbled slightly, as though awakening. He smiled faintly and adjusted the spring, easing it back into place with the delicacy of handling a bird's feather. The room's sounds fell into a slow rhythm, the whisper of metal, the gentle scrape of cloth, the soft chime of a clock in the corner marking the hour. When he finally wound the key, the little clock gave a hesitant click, then another, and then a tick. It was faint, almost unsure. Another followed steadier, then another still, until the rhythm became clear. A soft, confident voice had returned to the room. Ansel leaned back, exhaling through a small smile. The sound of this clock was slightly higher in pitch than most, light and musical, as though humming a private tune. He closed his eyes and listened, letting it blend with the others, a new thread woven into the fabric of time that filled the air. The lamp flickered gently, its light catching the curved glass faces of the clocks around him. Each one reflected a sliver of gold, creating a constellation of tiny suns scattered across the workshop. Shadows moved slowly over the walls, pendulums swinging like patient metronomes. He rose to place the newly repaired clock on a side shelf, among others waiting to be collected. As he did, he felt a wave of warmth, not from the lamp, but from the simple act of knowing that something once silent now lived again. On his way back to the bench, he paused by the window. Outside, the town slept beneath the hush of night windows, dimmed chimneys still. The stars shimmered faintly above, distant yet familiar. In the faint reflection on the glass, he saw the golden glow of his workshop behind him, a small universe of moving hands and measured hearts. He stayed there for a while, listening to the muffled harmony of ticking and chimes. The sound was constant, but never monotonous, a living reminder that time could be both motion and rest. When he finally returned to his chair, he took a deep breath and poured himself a fresh cup of tea. The steam rose in delicate spirals, catching the lamplight before fading into the cool air. He cradled the cup in his hands, feeling its warmth spread through his fingers. All around him, the clocks kept their unending dialogue, soft, balanced, serene. The air hummed with their patience. Ansel felt it settle into his chest, a rhythm as steady as his own heartbeat. He sipped, exhaled, and closed his eyes, the faint smile still on his face. The night had deepened into stillness, but inside this room, time was gently awake, breathing, listening, waiting for morning. The next night unfolded with the same familiar calm, a slow and unbroken rhythm that seemed to cradle the town in its arms. The cobblestones outside glistened faintly under the silver wash of moonlight, and a faint mist curled through the quiet streets. Inside the workshop, the air was warm and fragrant with the scent of oiled wood and burning wick. Ansel had risen earlier than usual that evening. Something about the stillness had drawn him to his bench before the lamps were even lit. He moved through the dim light with ease, guided more by memory than by sight. When he struck a match and touched it to the lamp's wick, the flame caught with a sigh, spilling its gentle amber glow across the room. Shadows stretched softly, revealing rows of clocks standing in timeless patience, He took a moment to listen before beginning. The soundscape was gentle, layered, harmonious, a slow pulse that filled every inch of space. It was as though the clocks breathed together a quiet conversation in a language only he understood. On the work table lay a tall brass clock, one that had sat untouched for many weeks. Its casing gleamed faintly beneath a thin film of dust, and its pendulum hung still mid-swing, as if paused mid-thought. Ansel had always admired its craftsmanship, the intricate engraving of ivy around its face, the careful balance of its design. It had belonged to a local library once before being retired into silence. He polished the brass casing first, the soft cloth, gliding in slow circles. Each motion released a dull glint that brightened gradually, like dawn easing over a horizon. When he lifted his hand, the metal shone, reflecting both the lamplight and his gentle expression. He reached for a small tin of graphite powder and dabbed a brush into it, dusting the gears with patient precision. The powder caught the light as it fell, tiny silver motes that disappeared before they landed. The faint scent of metal filled the air. The rhythm of his movements was unhurried, almost meditative. Brush, breathe, adjust, brush again. A clock on the opposite wall chimed a low, velvety tone. Another answered higher and lighter, their sounds weaving through the air in slow harmony. Ansel smiled at the exchange. He liked to imagine they spoke to one another, each marking its own place in the long, unbroken stream of time. When he began to adjust the pendulum, a delicate vibration passed through his fingertips. The mechanism stirred faintly, like the flutter of wings in still air. He steadied his hand, waiting. Slowly, the pendulum began to move again, its arc shallow but graceful. The clock answered with a low tick, hesitant, then sure. He exhaled softly. "There you are," he murmured. It was not a voice meant for anyone but the room itself. Yet the workshop seemed to hear. The ticking joined the others, blending into the quiet chorus that never ceased. The sound filled the spaces between thought, the pauses between breaths. Ansel leaned back and looked around. The light played across the faces of the clocks, catching the delicate glimmer of glass and brass, the warmth of oak and mahogany. Each one seemed to pulse faintly, its rhythm aligned with something larger, the heart of the night itself. He thought of how many evenings had passed this way, each one marked by the same rituals: light the lamp wind, the clocks, listen, and wait. Time to him had never been a measure of progress, but of presence. It was not something to conquer, but to inhabit moment by moment, gear by gear, breath by breath. He took a small notebook from the drawer beside him. The pages were filled with sketches of mechanisms, small diagrams, and the occasional line of reflection, written in neat cursive. He turned to a blank page and wrote, "Some clocks remind me of people steady, patient, quietly mending themselves over time." He paused, tapping the pencil gently against the paper. Outside, the wind rustled through the ivy, and the sound of a distant bell drifted faintly through the night. It was not loud enough to name, just a soft shimmer in the air, like the echo of a thought. He closed the notebook and returned it to its drawer. The flame of the lamp trembled slightly as he leaned closer to examine another clock. This one smaller rounder its surface, painted with fading blue enamel. He wound it carefully, his fingers turning the key until the tension held firm. When he released it, the mechanism began to turn. A slow, even ticking filled the air again. It joined the others, seamlessly indistinguishable yet essential. Each sound layered into the next until the room felt almost alive, a single steady breath sustained by 100 voices. Ansel sat still for a long time, hands folded loosely, gaze drifting between the clocks. The lamplight softened, and the air around him seemed to shimmer with quiet contentment. The night outside deepened. Beyond the window, the world had fallen completely silent. But within the walls of the workshop, time continued its gentle hum, neither hurrying nor waiting, simply being. Ansel took one last look around before extinguishing the flame. The lamp dimmed to a single golden thread, then faded. Yet, even in darkness, the clocks went on steady, constant, serene. Their voices became the lullaby of the night. By the following night, the air outside had turned cool and fragrant with autumn. A quiet wind wandered through the cobbled streets, stirring the ivy along the walls of Ansel's workshop. The leaves brushed softly against the window panes, whispering their gentle rustle into the warm glow within. Ansel had just finished arranging a new line of clocks along the central shelf. Each one freshly polished, their brass frames catching the amber light. The entire workshop shimmered faintly, as if holding its breath. The clocks ticked in a low, overlapping rhythm, 100 soft voices speaking the same peaceful language. He moved slowly around the room, his hand trailing along the edges of the wooden cases, his fingers tracing smooth curves and corners worn by time. Each clock had its own story, and he could feel it in the grain, in the shape of its face, in the way its sound joined the others. He never hurried through these moments. He let them unfold like conversation. From the workbench came the faint scent of beeswax and oil. A small kettle steamed quietly on a hot plate near the wall, filling the air with the earthy aroma of steeping chamomile. Ansel poured a cup and let the warmth settle into his hands. The light from the lamp made the tea's surface glow, golden tiny ripples forming as he lifted it to his lips. He sat down beside the table, gazing at the rows of clocks. The sound wrapped around him, steady and kind. "You all keep such perfect time," he murmured, though he knew they did not need to. The beauty lay not in precision, but in the harmony of their imperfection. Some clocks running just a breath fast, others lagging by a second or two. Together, they created a living rhythm, one that felt closer to the natural world than to any exact measure. He reached for a book resting nearby, an old leather-bound volume filled with sketches of escapements and pendulums, its corners softened by years of touch. The first few pages carried faint pencil notes, reminders written long ago by another clockmaker. Ansel traced a finger over one inscription, the handwriting neat and deliberate. The rhythm of a clock should match the rhythm of its keeper's breath. He smiled at that. It was a truth he had learned long before finding it written here. Perhaps the previous craftsman had known the same quiet peace that filled this room, the balance between time and stillness. As he read, a chime sounded from somewhere behind him, low and deep, followed by a second lighter tone. He turned slightly, recognizing the sound of the restored library clock. It was keeping perfect pace now, its voice rich and resonant. The vibrations seemed to fill the air, spreading warmth through the room. Ansel set the book aside and stood. He walked toward the back wall, where the largest of his timepieces stood a tall clock, framed in mahogany, its pendulum gleaming like liquid gold. It was one of the first he had ever repaired many years ago. Now, it stood as the silent guardian of the workshop. Its slow measured beat the anchor around which all the others revolved. He opened its glass door and polished the pendulum's edge with a soft cloth. His reflection moved gently across its surface, distorted by the curve of the metal. When he leaned closer, he could see the faint shimmer of the lamplight and the blurred outline of its own smile. For a moment, he rested his hand on the wooden frame. The surface was warm from the glow nearby, and beneath his palm, the faint vibration of the ticking felt almost like a pulse. He imagined that if one listened closely enough, one could hear the heartbeat of the workshop itself, steady, enduring kind. The night deepened around him. Outside, the wind quieted, and the mist returned, pressing softly against the windows. The clocks filled the silence with their quiet continuity. The air felt thick with calm, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. Ansel returned to his stool, took another sip of tea, and allowed his mind to drift. His gaze wandered from one clock to another, the movement of the pendulums like breathing slow, precise, eternal. The sound of ticking was no longer separate. It had become part of him, part of the air, part of everything. He thought briefly about what it meant to care for something so tirelessly, to keep mending, winding, and tending to things that marked time for others, but asked for nothing themselves. There was a quiet beauty in it, a lesson about the constancy of small acts. Every clock he restored was a way of returning something to the world, not for glory, not even for gratitude, but simply because stillness deserved to be heard. He wrote one sentence in his notebook before closing it for the night. To listen to time is to learn the language of patience. He placed the pencil beside it and looked once more around the room. The lamplight had softened, wrapping the workshop in a golden haze. Every surface glowed faintly, glass, wood, brass, all bathed in the same calm radiance. When he finally rose, the tea had cooled and the air had grown still. He wound one last clock before bed, its tiny mechanism whispering as it came to life. The new ticking folded itself into the collective rhythm, seamless and sure. Ansel smiled, extinguished the lamp, and let the night take its quiet place once more. The morning light came softly this time, pale and unhurried, sliding through the small panes of the workshop windows. The air was cool and still holding the faint scent of varnish and lavender polish from the night before. Every clock was awake, marking the early hours in a quiet, layered rhythm. The deeper voices of the larger clocks blending with the light, sprightly ticks of pocket watches and desk pieces. Ansel entered with a shawl around his shoulders and a calm smile on his face. The morning was rare. He seldom worked before dusk, preferring the intimacy of lamplight. But something about this day felt different, bright yet gentle, like the first stroke of a painter's brush on an empty canvas. He opened the windows slightly. The air that drifted in was crisp and clean, carrying with it the faint fragrance of dew-soaked ivy and distant bread baking somewhere down the lane. The mingled scents wove themselves into the familiar perfume of the workshop wood, brass oil, and thyme. Ansel stood still for a moment, breathing it in. The sunlight spilled across the benches, warming the cool metal tools, catching on the glass faces of the clocks until they glittered softly. He could see dust motes turning slowly in the light, each one glowing for a moment before fading back into invisibility. He set a small record on his old gramophone, a piece of music he often played when the morning felt unusually peaceful. The gentle hum of strings filled the space, weaving between the ticking clocks like a slow conversation. It made the room feel even more alive, as though each clock were keeping time with the melody. On his table lay a new arrival, a slender wall clock with a painted face of soft blue and faded gold. The courier had delivered it the night before, with no note, no story, only a label bearing his name. He ran his hand along its wooden frame, tracing the fine cracks in the paint. The silence of the clock was not sad. It felt like waiting. He began his quiet work. The familiar tools moved gracefully between his fingers, the motions practiced and calm. As he opened the casing, he discovered a tiny inscription inside, almost hidden beneath a gear. For Clara, that she may never lose her hours to sorrow. The words were delicate, worn, and handwritten with care. He smiled softly. Every clock had its secret, a message, a hope, a memory sealed within it. He had long believed that the true purpose of a clock was not to measure time, but to preserve the moments people wished to remember. He worked carefully, cleaning the gears and brushing away the traces of stillness. The faint scent of the wood rose as he polished the interior, mingling with the morning air. When the mechanism was finally clean, he began to wind it. The resistance was light, the key turning easily. Then came the sound he had been waiting for, a soft, uncertain tick that grew steady with each breath. He leaned closer and listened. The sound was delicate and tender, almost like a whisper spoken into the quiet. The hands began to move again, gliding over the faded numerals with new purpose. Ansel placed the clock upright and stepped back. The morning sunlight touched its face, making the gold accents shimmer faintly. The melody from the gramophone played on, slow, steady, graceful. The clock's ticking joined in perfect rhythm. For a long time, he simply stood there, watching the pendulum sway. It seemed to mirror the movement of the light, the rhythm of the music, even the steady rise and fall of his own breathing. There was something deeply reassuring in that unity, a reminder that everything in the world had its own quiet motion, even if unseen. He poured himself a cup of fresh tea, letting the steam curl upward into the bright air. The taste was delicate floral, slightly sweet, a morning meant to be savored. As he sipped, his eyes wandered to the rows of clocks lining the walls, each marking its own time, but all sharing the same heartbeat. He thought about how each of them, once silent, now sang softly again. Each one a story returned to life, a whisper rescued from forgetting. There was comfort in that, in the slow, patient work of listening, mending, and beginning again. Outside, a bird landed on the ivy just beyond the window, its feathers puffed against the breeze. It peered curiously into the workshop, tilting its head at the rhythmic sound. Ansel chuckled quietly and nodded as though greeting an old friend. The bird stayed for a moment longer, then fluttered away, leaving behind a single feather that caught against the window frame. The clock he had just repaired gave its first chime, soft and uncertain, but bright as glass. It was the kind of sound that felt like morning distilled into a single note. The workshop filled with it, every surface catching and holding the tone until it faded back into the warm ticking of the room. Ansel set the cup down and closed his eyes, letting the sound linger. The world beyond his walls might have been moving fast, days turning hours spent, but here time had found its gentlest pace. When he opened his eyes again, the sunlight had shifted, painting the far wall in gold. He turned down the gramophone, leaving only the hum of the clocks behind. Their voices were enough, more than enough. He wrote a small line in his notebook before setting it aside for the day. The morning hums its own kind of time, softer than hours, slower than dreams. Then he returned the newly restored clock to its place on the wall, where it joined the others in their calm conversation. Evening returned with a quiet familiarity, settling over the rooftops and chimneys like a gentle blanket. The day's brightness faded into shades of violet and silver, and soon the town's windows began to glow one by one, lanterns coming alive in the dusk. Inside the clockmaker's workshop, the soft light of a single lamp flickered against glass and brass, coaxing warmth from the growing dark. Ansel moved slowly through the room, checking each clock in turn. His motions were steady, ritualistic, as if performing a song he had known his entire life. The sounds around him, ticks, chimes, faint clicks of winding keys mingled into an orchestra of calm. There was no need for thought. His body remembered every motion, every pressure of his tools, every sound that told him when a gear had found its perfect place. Tonight his attention rested on a small clock unlike any other. It was encased in silver and glass, its face adorned with tiny stars painted in faded blue. It had been sent from a seaside town long ago, repaired once, then forgotten on the shelf. Its inscription, barely visible, now read, "To those who wait, may time be kind." He lifted it gently, turning it in his hands. The metal felt cool beneath his fingertips, and he could smell a trace of salt still caught in its wooden frame, the faint ghost of sea air from years past. He smiled. There was something comforting in the idea that a clock might carry the memory of a place. He set it down on the bench and lit another small lamp, its flame joining the golden glow that stretched across his workspace. The tools gleamed softly, arranged in careful order. The fine screwdrivers, the tweezers, the brush whose bristles were thin as silk. The shadows they cast swayed slowly in rhythm with the pendulums along the walls. Ansel opened the casing, revealing the sleeping heart of the clock. Inside, the wheels had tarnished. The small balance spring was stiff with disuse. He worked with the care one might give to a delicate instrument, brushing away the dust, coaxing each piece to breathe again. His movements were unhurried, accompanied only by the whisper of metal and the quiet hum of the other clocks keeping watch. As he worked, he thought about the inscription, "May time be kind." He had always liked that thought. Time could rush, could fade, could change, but in moments like these, it could also rest. Here, in this room, time was patient. It did not demand or diminish. It simply lingered soft and weightless. The workshop had a way of amplifying that feeling. Every corner seemed to hum with its own quiet rhythm, the faint swing of pendulums, the sigh of polished wood, as it settled with the temperature of the night. Even the dust in the air seemed to move more slowly here, as though reluctant to disturb the stillness. Ansel replaced the cleaned gear train, his fingers steady as he tested its motion. When the mechanism began to turn again, a faint sound rose, hesitant, uneven, like the first breath after a long silence. He wound the key and waited. The ticking steadied. The clock's small silver hands began to move, gliding smoothly across the painted sky of its face. He leaned closer, listening. The rhythm was gentle, quieter than most, but certain. A smile crept over his lips. "There you are," he whispered, echoing words he had said 100 times before. Back again. The chime that followed was delicate, a soft bell-like tone, pure and crystalline. It filled the air, then faded, leaving behind a hush that felt almost sacred. For a few moments, Ansel simply sat in silence, eyes closed, letting the calm wash through him. He could feel the weight of the years in his hands, not as burden, but as texture. Every clock he had ever touched seemed to exist in this moment, their collective rhythms forming a kind of invisible embrace around him. He rose, placing the silver clock on a nearby shelf beside the others. The reflection of the lamplight shimmered across its glass face, as though it were catching the glow of 1,000 distant stars. The night outside was utterly still now. Beyond the window, the ivy swayed faintly, the air holding the scent of damp leaves and quiet stone. The faint echo of a faraway bell, perhaps from the town square, drifted through the open window, perfectly in step with the ticking within. Ansel returned to his chair and wrote a few words in his notebook, his handwriting slow and measured. There is a kindness in things that move without haste. He let the pencil rest, then closed the notebook softly. Around him, the clocks continued their endless song, each one a reminder that even the smallest motion could be an act of grace. He leaned back, folded his hands, and listened until thought itself grew still. The world beyond the walls could turn as it pleased. Within this space-time had found its gentlest rhythm, and as the lamplight burned low, the workshop seemed to breathe alive with the calm heartbeat of its countless ticking voices. Night descended slowly over the town, not as darkness, but as a soft unveiling, a deepening of color and quiet. The cobblestones glimmered with the faint sheen of evening mist. and the windows along the street reflected the amber glow of lanterns. Inside Ansel's workshop, time unfolded in its familiar harmony. Every clock, from the smallest pocket piece to the tallest case, kept its patient rhythm, their overlapping ticks forming a tranquil ocean of sound. Ansel sat by the window, a cup of warm tea between his palms. The room was dim, except for a single lamp casting its calm light across the workbench. Its glow touched the rows of clocks, brushed the outlines of tools, and softened the silver in his hair. Outside, the night air was still, and somewhere beyond the ivy, an unseen stream murmured faintly, a quiet accompaniment to the clock's gentle song. He had finished his work for the day. The shelves were full of restored timepieces, each one breathing again, each one telling its own version of the passing hours. The silver clock, with its painted stars, now chimed at every hour with delicate precision. The brass library clock spoke in low, reassuring tones. The little wooden one from the note the grandmother's clock ticked with a warmth that felt almost human. He listened to them all, smiling softly. The sound filled him with a sense of completion, not of endings, but of peace. The quiet balance that arrives when everything has found its rightful rhythm. He took a slow sip of tea and thought about how many nights had begun and ended within these walls. Time had been both guest and companion. It had moved through the workshop like a kind teacher, showing him not how to hurry through the days, but how to dwell gently within them. The lamplight flickered slightly, and he reached out to steady it. Its flame swayed once, then steadied, glowing a little brighter. The motion reminded him of the pendulums that swung in the quiet air, each one carrying its own calm truth, that every movement, no matter how small, could bring light to the stillness. He rose from his chair and crossed the room, stopping at each clock in turn. He touched the cases lightly, wood, brass, enamel, glass, feeling the subtle hum beneath his fingertips. The sound was life itself, the steady, unbroken whisper of things that endure. When he came to the tall mahogany clock, the oldest of them all, he paused. Its pendulum moved in long, even arcs, its deep tick filling the space like a heartbeat. He rested his hand on its frame and closed his eyes. In that moment, he felt no weight of hours, no pull of days gone by. Time was not behind or ahead of him. It was here, in the warmth of the room. In the air, he breathed in the pulse of the clocks that surrounded him. It was not a thing to measure, but a presence to share. He whispered, almost to himself, "You've kept me company, haven't you?" The clock answered in silence, yet the next chime that sounded seemed softer, almost affectionate. It rolled through the air like a lullaby, and Ansel smiled. He turned back toward his work table where his notebook lay open. By the dim light, he wrote his final line for the evening. Time is not what passes. It is what stays when everything else grows quiet. He set the pencil down and looked once more around the room. The golden lamplight swam gently across glass and brass, catching each surface in a final shimmer before dimming. The clocks continued to speak soft, patient, steady. Their rhythm blended into the night air, a whisper that stretched beyond the walls into the quiet streets and toward the sleeping world. Ansel leaned back in his chair, hands folded in his lap. The warmth of the tea lingered in his chest. The workshop breathed around him, alive, peaceful, endless. Outside, the moon rose high above the rooftops, its light tracing the outlines of the ivy and spilling in through the open window. It touched the edges of the clocks, painting them with silver. Ansel's eyes drifted closed, his breath settling into the same rhythm as the ticking around him. The workshop hummed, its eternal lullaby, steady, calm, infinite. And in that harmony of quiet motion, the night held its breath perfectly at peace.